Hello, and welcome to the Masterpiece Ministries podcast, hosted by me, Abbey Burnett. This podcast exists to share stories of the transformation of God's people, his masterpieces. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things he planned for us long ago." My prayer is that you learn more about the love and faithfulness of God through the stories you hear from regular people just like you. Now, let's tune in and listen to this week's story. Enjoy!
All right. Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Abby?
I am doing great. It is a good day for a good day, you know?
We're here.
Yeah, we're good. You're here today to share your story. We're going to get into it. I know Anna through my sister. Her and my sister went to school together at Liberty University. And I'm trying to think of the first time we met. I don't really even, maybe when I went for a volleyball game or something.
That or didn't I come and visit for our spring break because we went to DC and I'd never been to DC before. I remember staying at your house is when I remember.
Yeah.
Then we prank called the Starbucks is what I'm remembering as well while we were like going to go to a movie.
That's how cool I was in like college, that I thought prank calling Starbucks was my thrill of a task for the day. So that sounds about right. Fun. Okay, yeah. So you must have. Oh yeah, was my other friend with us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, we went to museums and all that.
Yes.
So okay, yeah, I remember that. I have a picture in front of the Washington Monument with my sister.
Yes.
Very cool. Okay, so we met. Yeah, we met, and then we've kind of been like friends through my sister, and we were. I think the most time we spent together was at my sister's bachelorette party, which was a lot of fun.
Yep. Yeah, it was awesome. It was a good time.
It was a good time. But yeah, so Anna's here to share her story. She's a very strong believer and is doing awesome things for the Lord. So before we start, I like to start off with some gratitude. So Anna, what is something that you have been grateful for in the past, week, 2 weeks, month?
Yeah, I would say I've just been really grateful for how I've experienced God's love through his people. I went through January was really rough and really hard. Just was going through a lot of just suffering related things and going through grief and processing that. And just how I was able to experience like the felt love of Jesus by people just sitting with me in my suffering. Is something I've just been grateful for these past couple months. Even this past week, met with a friend, and there's a book that I've been reading called The Deepest Place by Kurt Thompson. And he basically talks about how it's so transformative when people can sit with you in your grief and look at you in the eye and say that they love you, because it's a glimpse of when we get to be in heaven and Jesus can look at us in the eye with love in spite of our brokenness. And so anyways, that book's been really cool to then see that in live with people. So yeah, just God's love through his people has been really powerful, and I'm super thankful for that. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, having people that can like mourn when you mourn and celebrate when you celebrate is just the best. Cool.
Right.
I think for me this week, I have just been like really focusing on and thinking about like how much God moves like just all the time, like in places that we don't even recognize. And so like I was thinking the other day about like a few different friends who like I see God moving in their lives. And so I've just been like so grateful for how like omnipresent, I guess, God is, and just like how he can be working so intricately in my life, but then also just as purposeful in somebody else's life, and then just as, purposeful in somebody else's. So I've just kind of been like in awe of that this week, and like just really grateful for a God who sees all, like loves on a big level, but then also on an intimate level, so. Cool.
Totally.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So let's jump in because you got a great story to share. So you can go ahead and start. Where do you want to start with your story?
Yeah. I think it's the classic. I'll just kind of start probably in high school and then go from there. But I like to divide my testimony, my story up into 3 parts because that's how Paul did it in Acts, where he talks about kind of life before Christ, your come to Jesus moment, and then how he's transformed you after that. So we teach our students. I'm a youth worker at Missoula Alliance Church with the youth ministry there. So that's what we practice our kiddos to share. And so I try to take that same formula because it's helpful and easy to remember. So, so kind of my life before Christ, I grew up in a Christian home. which meant my parents were super strong Christians. They were an amazing example of just humble and servant leaders. And so I grew up in a very supportive Christian family. And I went to about every single Christian thing you can think of. So VBS, Awana, went to middle school and high school youth group, summer camp. And I served in the church wherever I could. So in the nursery, we used to host an all-night party for middle school students. So I got to like run that, helped in all the ways that I could. It was crazy, but it was a lot of caffeine, and caffeine is helpful. But I was in a dangerous spot because I thought I was good in life because I knew all the right Christian answers. And since I did the Christian things and I was nice to people, I was therefore a follower of Christ. But in reality, my heart wasn't changed. So I like to think of it as I knew all the head knowledge, but the heart, they weren't lining up. They didn't line up. And so instead of having a heart that was centered and based in Christ, my life was kind of looking to fulfill itself and find joy and identity in kind of three things. The first was sports. I had a handful of friends that were really good friends, but my identity was in what I could produce. And so it was revolved around, weightlifting, training for the next sports season that I was in, and trying to receive an athletic scholarship. And what was really kind of twisted about it was on the outside it portrayed this like humble character, but deep down I was obsessed with receiving like all the accolades, the starting position. They call your name and it's this whole thing. Like I lived for that. Yes. Yeah. And so because it made me feel like I was important and worthy to be loved. And so that's kind of where that came from. The second thing was finding my identity or my worth in guys or just romantic relationships. And while I don't think I was ever self-conscious of who I was, I'm quite tall. And a lot of times that might be something that people are self-conscious about, but I wasn't. I was pretty fine in my own skin. I'm very goofy, very outgoing.
A midget compared to you. I'm like, hi.
We gotta post a picture and show the height difference. I'm pretty sure Emily's bachelorette party, you can probably find a picture of us. Totally different. But so then that was another place that I was looking for just a sense of worth and feeling loved and feeling truly beautiful, which obviously is not a great source to find that from because humans are always going to fail us. That's another story for another day. But so there was that. And then kind of the third place that I looked for sense of self-worth and satisfaction and joy was pornography as a cheap source of love. And this was a very hidden aspect of my life. And the reason for that is nothing against Christian purity culture at the time. I think they trying to do good things, helpful things. But the main message that was portrayed to me was, okay, guys, you all have a pornography issue. Let's get that solved. And then girls, be modest and wait for the man that God has for you. And while that's not necessarily wrong, pornography was never associated with girls having that issue. And so Satan, I'm almost positive, took advantage of this kind of focus and fed me this lie that if I were to ever tell anyone that I struggled with this, everyone would judge me.
You're
no
the
one
only
would love
one.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone would think I'd be this sick, gross person. So I just buried it as far down as I could. And so in a nutshell, my life pre-Christ was kind of a fake it till you make it Christian. And the funny thing is when I was looking at what school or college I wanted to go to, we had friends that lived in Virginia and knew I was looking for a Christian school. And they're like, you should go to Liberty. And so I went and I visited and I loved the coaches, loved the team. I loved everything. And I was like, man, this is going to be a great place. I can solve all of my issues because it's a Christian school. And I'll just wait until college because they're Christian. They're going to help me figure out for me.
They'll fix me. It'll be great. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All my issues and problems will go away because I'm at a Christian school. But you can tell by the sarcasm, I was so wrong. Not only did these three sources of joy and affirmation follow me, but they got worse. So for instance, related to sports, our head coach at the time very much placed our value, what we could do and produce, and not as people, which made me even more obsessed of wanting to perform well so I could appease this coach. And also, sorry, like strangely, I lived for when they would announce my name and they'd say from Missoula, Montana, because like Montana doesn't get a lot of credit for like good athletes coming out of anywhere. So like I lived for them to hear my name called in that way, which is weird.
Am the
but
chosen one from Montana.
Yes, I know. Montana produces good athletes. Like here they are. So there was that, and again, same like acting humble, but inside I lived for every moment that I could receive highlight or the spotlight in sports. In terms of kind of the guys in pornography piece, you could ask and Emily too, probably like my two other best friends or three best friends. We were kind of a little trio, but we make fun of it now that I went on 5 different dates with 5 different guys over the course of like 2 months. So I was just like, again, looking for that affirmation piece in like in guys. Well, I was like, this is great. Like people are interested in me. This is fantastic. And it was like, it was terrible for my soul. And then when those didn't work out, because, that's a lot of numbers there to rotate through, I would turn to porn as a way to find love. And actually viewing it got worse when I was in college.
At Liberty.
So here I am. Yeah, right. At a Christian school, like, I think, and Liberty was a great school. I love my experience, but like just because it's a Christian school doesn't mean you don't deal with
like
real
people
world
think
problems.
If I send my kid to Liberty, like it'll be fine because they're going to follow all the values and et cetera, which, because I even thought about going to Liberty at one point and I was like, absolutely not. Now, when I was looking at schools, it was still a little bit stricter than it is right now. Like it was like, you're not even allowed to look at a man. And I was like, okay, I can't. But yeah, like, it's just interesting because I think people think you go to a Christian school and like everything you're gonna just keep, you will excel, and some people do, but like there's also another side of it that people don't hear enough.
Right. So that's kind of where I was at through kind of my freshman year at Liberty, and so my coming to Jesus moment kind of came through 2 things that sparked my attention of God and my need of a personal relationship, not just head knowledge, but like my heart is sick and it needs help. And the first, actually, thanks to Emily, another shout out to Emily, was when I met Zach, because it was through Emily that I ended up meeting him. We were in a study session together. But the more that I was hanging out with him, the more I was asking this question, like, what makes him different? Like, there's something going on here that has not been my experience with other guys, nor just other friendships that I'd had in my life up to that point. I'm like, something's different. He was super loyal to his friends. He loved people where they were at. The way that he treated his sisters, it was just like this, like this love kind of like oozing out. That's not a good word, but this like love that was just kind of like coming out of him. Like overflowing, and was just like super gracious towards people. And that proved itself because he was the first person I ever told that I was struggling with being addicted to viewing pornography. And instead of responding with judgment, hate, or rejection, which is what the enemy wanted me to believe, it was love and forgiveness. And it was like, it was crazy. And the more that I was around him, I realized that the difference in him was Jesus in him. And I was thinking, man, like if Zach has this much love for me and for other people, like how much more does God, who made me, knows me, loves me? And I'm like, okay, like this is like this is something I've been looking for my whole life, and it's all coming to like into view, like through him and how he treated me. And I also realized that first year that we were dating that I wasn't a true Christian. Like I couldn't remember a moment in my life where I made it personal. I just relied on my parents or my youth leaders or my church to kind of be my faith for me. And so when I went into my sophomore year, I knew that I needed to give my life to Christ. Not just a rededication, which is great, and those are helpful for people, but I was like, I need to like give my life fully to Christ. But once again, Satan fed me this lie that you're at a Christian school with a Christian boyfriend on a Christian team. Like if you share that you were never a Christian and now you are, like, that's weird. So there's this new fear evolving in my heart. Right. Yes. A fraud is a really good way to put that. And so it wasn't till the spring of my sophomore year when God spoke to my heart in such a powerful way, that led me to accepting Jesus into my heart and making my relationship personal. And it was our campus pastor at the time was sharing out of Ephesians 2. And it's at the beginning of Ephesians 2 where it talks about I think he's talking to the Gentiles, their life before Christ and how they were dead in their transgressions and sins. And he actually, I remember he made us replace the word you in that sentence with our name. So it would basically say Anna is dead in her transgressions and sins. He kept reiterating this point that, like, you are a dead man walking without Jesus. Like, you can have the persona of everything's okay. You can have the persona that you're following Christ. You can do a really job acting, but you're just a, what do you say? Like, you're just a corpse you're just wearing a corpse is basically what he said. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. Yes. Yeah. I'm listening. And then he went on to, as an example, gave the testimony of his wife and basically shared how she grew up in the Christian home. She went to all the Christian things. She helped out with all the Christian things. And she was actually a chaperone at a kids conference, I think. They're leading a team of kids at this giant conference, and they had a time where people could respond to the gospel and commit their life to Christ for the first time. And she, as a leader at a kids conference, went up, and everyone there, the group that she was with, when she came back and sat back down, they're like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? I'm pretty sure she was a pastor's kid as well, if I'm remembering properly.
Wow. Yeah.
And she said, she was like, and this is where, like, I still get chills thinking about it, but she said, like, I know I'm not right in my heart with God. I never have been. And so me listening to this, I'm just like, hey, I'm already crying because I'm like, right. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and not that you need another person to, like, show their courage for you to want to act on it. Like, man, if she can do that, and like, and realizing, like, also God's the most important thing. It's not what people think about us. Then, like, I can do it too. Like, and God is the most important thing.
Who's like walked your path, like, means that I'm not alone. Right. I'm not the only one who's gone through this. And so, like, to hear your almost exact story, like, spoken right back to you, like that. Yeah. There's no mistaking that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I remember it was after that time when he shared that message that I was hanging out with Zach, and I was super nervous because it's another, rubber meets the road. Okay, I'm going to share something that I'm ashamed of, but I want to make this decision to follow Christ. And so I was like, Zach, like, I know I think I had rededicated my life like 2 weeks ago, but I was like, I'm like, Zach, like, I don't need to rededicate my life. Like, I want to give my life over to God for the first time. I've never done that. And without missing a beat, he was like, okay. He's like, let's do it. Like, it wasn't even like, oh, really? Or again, so God just affirming to me in that moment, like, that was the right thing to do and what my soul and what my heart needed. And so I ended up accepting Jesus that evening. And so that was kind of the coming to Jesus moment. And then after Jesus, and since he's been in my life and I've had that personal relationship, I didn't necessarily have this sense of, like, joy and fulfillment immediately, but he slowly started to transform those 3 areas of my life to this new creation that we are in Christ. And Ephesians talks about this, I think it says new creation, like who we are when we choose to accept Jesus as but God because of his abundant mercy and grace. We're now new creations. So related to sports, it totally changed my perspective on who I was playing for. Instead of playing for myself, it was to show the joy of the Lord and to bring that joy out. So whether I was on the bench, whether I was starting, whether I was in and out, whatever it was, even traveling, like, I'm going to show the world that I have the joy of the Lord in me. And this was really cool because it was actually put to the test and proven during my senior year. It was a week before our conference, or 2 weeks before our conference tournament. So a week before senior night. And I went up to go block like I always would as a middle blocker. And I landed on my teammate's ankle and I got a high ankle sprain. which if you know anything about those, being an athlete, those you're usually out like 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the severity. And I was like, okay, if this would have happened to old Anna pre-Jesus, she would have been devastated, angry, just like totally bitter. But I still remember that moment. Like I can still show the joy of the Lord. And so like the next week, it was my senior night. I couldn't play. My parents came all the way from Oregon and they couldn't watch me play. And so, but I remember there's a really cool picture of, we had won a point, and when I would play on the court, a lot of times I'd put both my hands up in the air, and that was like the way that I cheered. It was always my go-to. And I remember from senior night, there's a picture of me at the end of the bench with my foot up in a boot, and I'm doing the same like pose, which was like the sweet moment of like affirming that joy. And then the other really cool thing that happened, so I, through the skill of our fantastic athletic trainer and doctors and people, I was able to recover enough to at least play in our like second game in the conference tournament. And we ended up losing that game, and it was going to be our last game. But we played in a postseason tournament, so it really wasn't, but we thought it was. And so I'm heading back to the locker room, and I'm like super sad, and I'm passing the opposing team's head coach. I didn't know him very well. I just knew he was the head coach. And I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he stopped me and he said, Anna, like, you had a great season. He goes, we're really going to miss the joy that you play with on the court next year.
Wow. That's
and
awesome.
I was like, and so it was like this total God moment of like, like you did your job. Like you showed the joy that I had asked you to do. And it was seen by someone else, that didn't know that was my mission or my purpose. So that was like so cool to see that moment and have that happen. In terms of like pornography, I haven't engaged viewed pornography in over 7 years, I think, if I can do the math right. And it and the really cool thing is God's given me multiple opportunities to share that part of my story with other women, which to be honest, the first couple of times I shared, it was like, oh, thanks for sharing. And then like didn't hit. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep being faithful. Yeah. I'm like, this is weird. Like, okay, I'm just going to keep going.
You're like, here I am being extremely vulnerable with you. And you're just like, oh, cool. And you're like, never mind.
I'm like, should I have shared that? I don't know. But the more that I shared it with people, and I remember I shared it at an FCA camp that I was, serving with in California, in the summer of 2019. And I'd shared that with all the volleyball girls at that camp. I think it was like 200, 300 high school campers just for the volleyball portion. And to hear that night in debriefs with other counselors, they're called huddle leaders in FCA, but counselors, where there was not a revival, might be too strong of a word, but like girls that were coming forward and sharing, they were struggling with it. But we're so afraid because they didn't know anyone that struggled with it too. And so, and there's been other moments like that where I've been able to help others like bring that to light, because when it's in the light, I mean, that's who Jesus is. He's the light of the world. Like where there's lightness, like darkness cannot overcome him.
It loses, so just the healing power.
Yes. Right.
Like when your sin is hidden and in your own like life, like the devil can just say whatever he wants to say to you and you don't have any defense against it, because there's no other, like, and even in the light means like even bringing it to God, right? Like, I don't know about you, but like for me, it's like to actually go before the Lord and be like, yeah, I sinned in this way. And like, I have to, like, that's almost, sometimes it's like scarier to like go like vertical than it is to go horizontal, because it's like you have to admit that you're not perfect and you've like struggled. But so like even when you can start to say that to God and to other people, like it doesn't define you anymore. You lose all your it loses all power, because it's like, well, now it's out there and I don't have to like hide anymore. So
no, absolutely. And it was just cool to have a front row seat to seeing that happen to other people. Like it was so cool and so rewarding, because for so long I was so ashamed. I think in my text, we were talking back and forth, like it was something I was so ashamed of that I never thought I'd be sharing it publicly with others in the hopes that they could find like healing through Jesus. So that's just how we redeemed that. And then kind of, in terms of the identity in guys or relationships, shortly after, I kind of gave my life over to God. He placed a call in my life to go into full-time ministry. And I was like, what? Like, I really like science. Like, I thought I was going to be a PA or like go into
Mhm.
forensics, like human body's so cool. But I kept getting this like, not maybe vision, I guess, or I had these dreams where I'd picture myself in a doctor's office with a student versus at
Mhm.
camp or at a youth group. And the more I kept picturing these two pictures that God would bring to my mind, the one with the kids in ministry and in camp, it just I felt more at peace versus a
Mm.
doctor's office or medical field. It just felt like there was a disconnect. It was really weird.
Hmm.
And so I kind of took a leap of faith because I had 2 years left of school, and to try and switch your major in the
Oh, that's
middle.
right. Yeah, yeah. I remember
I
you
remember
changing majors now that you say it. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was crazy because our academic advisor at the time, and I think she still is, she's fantastic. But she told us, like, if you ever come and change your major halfway through, like, I'm going to say no. And I'm
Oh,
like, okay, but like, I need to change.
you're like,
And
but
I
like I have a dream.
remember, right, right. And I literally remember before I went into her office, I was like, God, like, if this is like, if I'm only going to do this if I can still complete it in the 2 years left of school, because I didn't want to spend
Mm.
money. I was on scholarship. I didn't want to take that extra time. So I'm like,
Yeah.
even if it's hard, but I can do it, then that's like a sign that I'm supposed to change. And lo
Yeah.
and behold, I go in and she's a little mad at first, but then she's like, okay, let me go check and I'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I kid you not, she said, it's going to be hard, but you can do it. And I was like,
Oh, awesome.
okay,
Yeah.
God, cool. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to do this
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I changed my major to camp ministry, and now I've been working in full-time youth ministry for the past 4 years. And it's just been so cool to see just the opportunity that he's given to me to speak into the lives of junior high and high school students.
Mm-hmm.
And ministry is messy because you're working with people. But yet it's been so rewarding that God's included me on the work that he wants to do. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just been so transformative and affirming in different ways in different seasons. And that's kind of where I am today. Just
Yeah.
still trying to embrace that call that he's put on my life in the highs and the lows. Because there's good times and bad times, but he's just been so faithful, and I'm so thankful for that.
Mm.
And that's kind of, in short,
That's
my
awesome.
story that I wanted to share. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You did awesome. I love that. So you mentioned a scripture, Ephesians 2, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
2, 4 through 5. Yeah.
Okay, specifically 4 through 5. So yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
going to read it really quick. It says,
Yeah.
but God, who is rich in mercy because of his great love that he had for us, made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in
Mm,
trespasses. You are saved by grace. And I love this
mhm,
passage because this passage is like a perfect like kind of like a mini gospel, like condensed.
mm.
Because I literally have my Bible. It says gospel all down the side. Whoa. But yeah, because my pastor is this really funny guy, and shout out, pastor at my church. He knows who he is. But he always says that God has a big old butt because there's so many things in scripture that it's like it's all this stuff. So like in this passage, it's talking about you were dead, you lived in your flesh, you were carrying out the
Mhm,
inclination of your flesh, and then it says but God, right? And so then like everything after the but negates everything
hmm.
before it. And so like I love this passage because you can see all the you read the first few verses and you're like, well, this is just a depressing state of affairs. And then it's like, but God, that's awesome. So what
Mhm,
do you think culture says about the issues? You talk about your identity, which is
mm,
I think it's such a big in multiple facets. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that we're fighting nowadays is
mm,
where do we find our identity?
mhm.
And because that influences everything you do. I'm reading
Yeah.
this new book called You Are a Theologian by Jen Wilkin. I was reading it this morning, and it was talking about what do you love? And even if you
Mm,
don't even if you don't have specific words to answer that with, you show that you answer it through everything you do, through what you consume, through what you
yeah.
do, the people you hang out with, where you spend your time. That all answers the question. And so what do you think culture has to say about where we find our identity, and, specifically with the issues that you mentioned, kind of sports or pornography or sexual sin, or like trying to find purpose and meaning in guys or girls,
Yeah, I've been working with students. A series we actually go through it's a series called Who Am I? And it's a question of like identity, purpose, and calling, I think is what we focus on. But I think it's hard because it starts so young, you could say, because everyone, especially now, and not to blame social media making the bad guy, but you can have so many different sources of information and influence in your life, and even their struggle to like make good friends. Like that's a huge issue, especially with the junior high students. Like I want good friends. And so I think when you have all these different sources that you can pull through that are appealing or attractive, it can be really easy to suck yourself into that and make your identity that thing. And I think it's hard too, because our culture places value on that. I mean, take sports, for example, like everyone worships and idolizes at least one pro athlete. Like they have their favorite athlete, and like there's something about them that they want to be like them. And so when that's kind of the goal, to be this person to be admired, you're looking to other sources that makes you that admired person, I think. So I mean, yeah, it's just, I don't know if it's gotten worse since I've been in college. I feel like it's just been the same, but just in different formats and forms.
Methods, yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
and I think there's something, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it just makes me think of a story from when I was younger. Just even if it's not like a sports athlete, like the amount of time that our culture spends on viewing sports, attending, and like I love sports. I was a college athlete. I still I love sports. But I remember when I was playing middle school lacrosse. Okay, so middle school lacrosse. This is not that deep. I'm not like, I'm average. Like I'm just learning how to like cradle a stick, and I'm like, whatever. And we had like a game on Sunday, and we were late because we went to church. And my middle school lacrosse coaches were like, "Well, it's time for you to attend a different service." And my parents were like, "Absolutely not!" Like. Because what? Like your priorities are like completely out of whack. And, the amount of, I don't know, whatever. I have some hot takes about things, but like the amount of people who like on Sundays, like I'll watch virtual church. I don't want to go to church, but I'll sit on my couch for 5 hours watching NFL football. Like, like that shows where your heart lies, right? Like it shows where you spend your time and what you consume. And so like, the idol of sports is so big in our culture, and it's like that's not our purpose on life is to just be in sports and whatever. But I also have a hot take about the women struggling with pornography, and I don't know what you think about this, and it might be controversial, but so I think for women nowadays it's books, and I don't know if you've heard of like the different series. Like there's some big like they're called like fantomances or something. Like I don't know. It's like fantasy and romance books like together, and they are like mad explicit, like real, like really very explicit. Like, and like girls will read this and they're like, well, I'm not watching anything, like and it's just reading it. But I'm like, that's the enemy, like tricking you into saying. And I've been convicted, like in my own. Like when I read books, like I used to kind of be the same way where I'd be like, I can read this and it's fine. And like, it's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And then I started being like, I feel like I really icky when I like hang out with like my church friends, and then I'm going to go home and read this book. And, it makes me think X, Y, Z or feel some type of way. And so it's like, that's the exact same thing, but the enemy's just disguising it. Like he's not crafty, he doesn't have new things, it's just rebranding them as different things to make you think it's not that serious, like it's not that deep. I don't know. I just feel like there's always
I was just gonna say, I think too, like just in general, I don't think you're really aware of how little things can influence you until it's over time, and you go, like you take these little tiny steps and you look back like, wait, I'm so far from where I was, but I thought I was only doing these like little things that weren't as bad or like controversial or So I agree with you. Yeah.
There's like a really old, I can't remember if it's like Mercy Me or something, but they have this song called Slow Fade, I think. And it's like kind of it's a little dramatic, but it's like, it talks about how it's like a slow fade when the lyrics are like, it's a slow fade when you give yourself away type thing. And so, I don't know. I just feel like as believers, like we have to be really on guard against stuff like that, because like Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Like it's not like Satan is like inventing new ways to tempt us or trick us or lie to us. It's all the same narratives. They're just reboxed as something else. It's, so so how do you fight that? Like, do you still have like temptations with these things? How do you fight them now in your life, post kind of Jesus moment?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot along the way, just like practical things that, whether it was from like a mentor or someone who also like struggled with pornography and just kind of lustful like ideation and thoughts like that. So I think those have been helpful, just kind of guardrails. And I think the one verse that I was always reminded of too, oh gosh, it's going to put my referencing to the test, but it basically talks about like, there's no temptation that has overtaken you, and like God always provides a way out. And even if that way out is small, it's always there. And that's always served as a comfort for me. And when I talk to other people about like, how do I get out of this? I'm like, well, what led you to that point? And can you backtrack and go, oh, I could have escaped here, or I could have done this. And even though it was small, like God doesn't like lead us and go, well, if you're going down that way, you're already done. So it's like he gives us key ways that we can escape these temptations. We've just got to be willing to realize that. I think.
Or even like for me, it's like, even if I recognize what the like quote unquote like kind of trigger points are, it's like I still have to then choose to actually take the way out, rather than like be like, oh, I see that and like cool, but like not today. I'm just gonna keep going. But like to actually stop yourself and be like, okay, how can I? Well, and it's interesting because especially around this topic, there's a pastor that I really love, JP Pokluda. I don't know if you've listened to his stuff before. But okay. So like, he's a very black and white thinker, and I'm a very like, I'm not a big like gray area person. And so he has a very like radical approach to like a lot of things. Cause he's like, people will complain, especially around the issue of porn, and be like, well, I just can't stop. And like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, where do you watch it? And they're like, on my phone. He's like, so get rid of your phone. And it's like, well, I can't do that. Like, and he's like, go get a flip phone. Like, you're going to be fine. And it's like this radical, like you really have to get to the point, or it's like, it's when I'm by myself. Okay. Then live with a roommate. Like you have to take some action in your sin and take responsibility for it, because otherwise it's like it's gonna keep festering if you don't ever do something about it and recognize where you're weak, and then where you can bring others into that or take action into that. So okay, I have one more question for you really quick, and it's around this topic, just because I don't think a lot of people like to talk about it, and I really have found a lot of like healing and a lot of like new information around this topic. So you mentioned like the purity culture that like you and I probably kind of grew up in when we were younger. And when we were growing up in kind of like the purity culture, like I don't think anyone was trying to like harm anybody. I think people, parents like were doing the best, churches were doing the best that they could with like what they thought was right. And like no one was intentionally like misleading people or like setting up these like damaging like schools. I don't know. I remember doing this like exercise with my mom. I like got taken away on some weekend, and I had to like categorize like things that I would do, like, and where the cliff was, and like, well, how far are you willing to go? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like 13. I'm like, okay, this is awkward with my mom. But she was like doing the best, she was doing the best that she could and what she thought was best. But I feel like that was all like, do this, because that's what God says to do. And that's what the Bible says to do. And this is what's going to make you like pure and whatever. But it never explained God's heart behind any of it. Like it was just like, here are the rules and the regulations, follow them. And then I'm like, yeah. And then I go to college and I'm like, never mind, like what? No, that was all. But then as I've gotten older and like learned what God's design is and all of that, like, I'm like, oh, like you love me so much and you care about me so much that you only want the best for me. And this is like sex in this like context is what's best for me. I'm like, oh, that makes like I can get on board with that because I know who God is and I know his characteristics and like I know he's not withholding anything from me and that he only wants good for me and things like that. So like I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Like why do we pursue holiness in that area of our life? Like why not just indulge in those things? Everyone else does it, so like why not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So just to back up just briefly, but we actually went through a series with our high school students. It's called Christian Sexuality, I believe. And I think I think you have to pay for it, but anyone can access it. I think they make it for parents, for anyone. But I think the biggest shift they're trying to make in terms of this whole kind of Christian purity is actually to rename it sexual integrity. And it's this idea that we do these things not because it's like a do and do not. Because a lot of times I remember when there was like the list of do or do nots and like when is it like far is too far and like those kind of questions. And instead of framing it as these rules, it goes, no, like when we understand God's love for us and what he's designed for us and how he's designed us, like that's the convincing piece as to why we abide by these standards. And I would highly suggest anyone to go through that series, check out their website. I think it's what they call Christian Sexuality. And they have like Francis Chan, Jackie Hill Perry, like they have a ton of like contemporary speakers who speak into it. And it was just really transformative for me and our students. And the other piece too, I think is helpful is just to have like an open dialogue. Cause a lot of times it was like, oh, like sex until marriage, but we're not going to talk about anything until between now and then. So like just follow these rules. But when you actually make an open dialogue, it makes this topic less shameful and actually brings light into how God has made us, what he desires for us. And so I think reframing it as a sense of this integrity that is put upon us because we love God and he loves us, rather than, oh, God's just this like hateful dude who's trying to smite me all the time. And if I do this, I'm too far gone. Like, again, that's the enemy speaking,
have any
but
fun
it's
or anything like that. Yeah.
Right. But if we're reframing to understand, man, like God, like I think it's in Romans where it talks about like God showed his love for us by sending his son to die for us while we were still sinners, while we were still the nastiest of nasty, like low of the low, he showed love to us. And that's what convinces me. And I remember even posts like while I was still dating Zach, I was like, no, like God loves me so much. Like I would, that love kind of overwhelmed me to want to do the right thing because of that relationship that I have, not this like rule following thing. So, I think hopefully that answers the question, but that's kind of how I frame it, is instead of it's having open dialogue, seeing it as an integrity piece. And then like you were saying, when you understand the why frames what we do. Because a lot of times we think, oh, what we do frames why. We're like, no. Like what we believe deep down in our core beliefs is going to frame how we act and live our lives. And so if we can get that piece figured out, then what we do follows that. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I think the community part to it, the open dialogue is like so important because even in my friend group as like an adult, like I even struggled with saying like, hey, I'm struggling with this because it's like, oh, you don't want everyone to be like, oh, well, Abby's struggling. And did you know, like there's always that fear, especially with girls, that like everyone's going to kind of like use your information against you. You know what I mean? And so, but like once I like said that to my friend, like, hey, I'm struggling with purity in this area, then it was like, oh, me too. And then it was like, oh, well, now we can just talk about this like openly and like I don't have to feel shameful about it. And so it's like people that I text at like 10 o'clock at night and I'm like, okay, you know, can you remind me of truth in this moment? And it takes away all the shame, like you mentioned, which is there is no Jesus is not shame. Jesus wants to love you. He might convict you, but he's not going to shame you. So awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. This was such a great episode, and I think it's definitely going to encourage everybody, but specifically girls who are just struggling with identity or you know, just figuring out where they are and hopefully bring freedom in areas of sin that they might be keeping under wraps. So we just thank you for your time. Do you have any other last words that you want to say?
No, awesome. I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me and letting me share.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
All right. All right, we will talk soon. And this concludes our episode of Masterpiece Ministries from this week. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Masterpiece Ministries podcast. I pray that you feel encouraged after listening and are reminded of God's love for you and for his people. You are his masterpiece, created anew in Christ to do good works he has prepared for you. What will your story be? If this podcast has been helpful or encouraging to you, please share it with your people. You can follow us on Instagram or TikTok at masterpiece.ministries. See you next week for a new episode. Bye!